Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Caplen, editor of The Banker. I'm with Stefania Palma, the Asia editor. We're reviewing the Asian results of the top 1,000. Stefania, let's get right to China because that's always has a big influence on the ranking. How have Chinese banks done this year?
So they're still extremely strong, especially in the world ranking.
Yeah.
ICBC still tops the list. It's fifth year in a row.
Right.
But there's been a bit of a change in the top five worldwide. So Agricultural Bank of China has dropped a position downwards. It's now sixth.
Yeah.
Now that leaves 3 out of the 5 banks in the top 5 that are Chinese.
All right, and why has Agricultural Bank of China dropped?
So essentially, out of the top 4 or 5 banks in China, ABC is the one that struggles a bit more when it comes, for example, to non-performing loans. In fact, it was the only bank that got downgraded this year after Moody's downgraded the Chinese sovereign. But I guess also a new dynamic in terms of the top Chinese banks is Bank of Communications.
It's at number 11, yeah.
Exactly. So it's moved from number 13 to number 11, and maybe we might see more Chinese banks like Bank of Communications in the top 10 next year.
Okay, clearly the Chinese banks are struggling with a slower economy and a more difficult economy from a banking point of view.
Absolutely, and also the net interest margins have fallen even for the top banks in the last 4 years. There's definitely pressure, which means that the banks that can afford to diversify more in terms of income sources are the ones that do better. They are also...
Which is probably the second-tier players, actually.
Exactly. So they are trying to expand as much as possible within China. Some of them, like Shanghai Rural Commercial Bank, are even looking to IPO soon. So there are very interesting dynamics in sort of the second-tier banks in the country.
Okay. Now, if we want to really find a difficult environment to operate in from a banking point of view, we can turn to Japan, where you have negative interest rates. So how have Japanese banks done in that kind of environment?
So within our Japanese top 25, all the banks have actually grown Tier 1 capital. But when you look at their dynamic in the world ranking, it's a bit of a mixed picture, and that's because Japan is quite a tough environment. There are negative interest rates by the Bank of Japan at the moment. So it's really only the very big banks that have the resources to diversify their income sources that do better. So the 3 mega banks, for example, are investing more in fintech, or they're really pushing overseas.
So if you're international, it's better. But if you're stuck with just the Japan domestic economy, it's quite tough.
Absolutely.
Right. So now let's talk about Asia more broadly. And we have a table that is Asia without Japan and China, obviously, because those two countries distort it. How has that appeared this year?
The key event for this year is the entry of 2 Indonesian banks. So we have Bank Mandiri and BRI that are now as part of the top 25 in Asia.
Asian banks, yeah.
Exactly. And they come in actually at 19th and 20th place. They're not even at the very bottom of the list. And Indonesia is a very interesting story right now because economically it's doing extremely well. There's a lot of potential even just within the domestic market because it's the 4th most populous country in the world, and the banks are really taking advantage. There's also a massive infrastructure drive from the government. The budget infrastructure is a top sector in terms of money that the government is allocating to the economy, and the banks are jumping on this opportunity.
Okay, but now that ranking is normally dominated by Australians. Is that still the case?
That is still the case. However, we see ANZ topping the list this year. It knocked National Australia Bank down from first place to second place. So Australia is still very strong, but there's a bit of change in the top part of the ranking.
Stefania, thank you very much.
Thank you.